I mean, it's not about what is centre-right or far-right. It's about what is a bit nuts.
Yeah.
And the paracetamol thing and the swans and all of that stuff. The question is this working for Nigel Farage or not? I mean, given the state of the polls...
The question first is like, what the is he doing? Sorry, yeah, but, let's not skip over that too quickly.
No, of course, but, OK, what the he's doing...
Those two things are related. I mean,
yeah, but what the he's doing is borrowing from Trump's tactics. Is Trump's America the new dividing line in British politics? We're not America.
Yeah.
That's exactly the point.
We have not got the same public opinion divisions as they have in America. It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And Nigel Farage was on Nick Ferrari this morning when he said that no science is settled. Well, I think that we know that, if an apple falls from the tree, it hits the ground because of gravity. There are things that are settled in science. And over decades, we have seen that paracetamol has been seen as a drug that is used safely. Yes, occasionally, minor side effects, but that applies to any drug at all. But he won't distance himself, or can't distance himself, or doesn't dare distance himself from something that Donald Trump has said, even though the health professionals in this country are unanimous that there is no link between the use of paracetamol by pregnant women and the likelihood of autism in the babies they give birth to.
He does start by saying he wouldn't bring that policy here. He calls him Mr. Kennedy, RFK Jr.'s policy. He says he wouldn't bring it here.
He said he'd listen to him, though.
Yes, and that's the curious thing, isn't it? That he's, for a man who always says he's sort of straight talking, he seems to just slime between the two positions. Wes Streeting yesterday came out and said, do not listen to Donald Trump. There is no proven link between Tylenol and autism. Farage could have done that. He could have got the British public on his side by showing that actually just because Trump says something, just because he magics up something in the Oval Office, doesn't automatically make it true. And yet Farage seems, frankly, very slippery on that question. He says he listens to RFK. He doesn't want to go with it. He doesn't want to go against it. And he doesn't really know anything about science. Which goes to this whole question that all you have to do is make people feel uncomfortable, make people feel unsure, make people feel that there might be something that they don't quite understand or know about, which then redirects their whole pattern of behaviour in a way that can be deeply damaging.
Well, I think actually the last 24 hours, this paracetamol stuff, but also we've seen it more widely, it is extraordinary the extent to which Trump is just become a complete pole and dividing line of and within British politics on a daily basis. I mean, it's always been the case ever since he was elected the first time, but compared to the first term, he is so ubiquitous in daily British politics now. Think about the three events, just three things in the last sort of 24 hours. One, we're talking about Farage now on the back foot, having basically sort of suggested that he's partly backs or at least wouldn't demur from Trump's line on paracetamol. I think that's a huge, huge mistake for him in reform. We can talk about that. Then you add in what you've just said, Emily, which is Wes Streeting coming out unequivocally against Trump. Why is Wes Streeting doing that? Well, one of the reasons is he's the health secretary. I've no doubt that he believes it, but it has not been unnoticed within Labour circles that Wes Streeting in all sorts of ways at the moment is on some manoeuvres, and I don't think he thinks it's any bad thing to be seen to be burnishing his credentials by slamming Trump in this way. And what did we see in Bournemouth at the Lib Dem party conference yesterday, as John was alluding to, but Ed Davey coming out in the most unequivocal and visceral terms comparing Trump's America and Farage's Britain.
Imagine living in the Trump-inspired country Farage wants us to become, where there's no NHS. So patients are hit with crippling insurance bills or denied healthcare altogether. That is Trump's America. Don't let it become Farage's Britain.
And there was lots of commentary yesterday and about how many times Davey invoked Farage and Trump. And I don't think mentioned Keir Starmer once. And he was sort of quizzed about that by several people and criticised for it. You know, basically on the basis that why isn't the opposition party or an opposition party critiquing the government? But I think that is really, really misplaced or misjudged, because I think Lib Dems are actually doing something really smart strategically, and I think Ed Davey kind of gets the direction that politics, at least for the moment, looks like it's going in, right? Which is, A, it's a bit weird to attack Ed Davey for being obsessed with Farage when, you know, most of the media is obsessed with Farage on a daily basis. He's shaping the kind of contours of politics. But more than that as well, it feels so much, if the next election is anything like the polling looks like now, which is a big if, but if it is like that, then we know it's not going to be a typical election where the opposition parties, all the opposition parties in one form or another, are just trying to knock the government out of contention. It's going to basically be two blocks. You're basically going to have a Farage block. Do you want Farage to be Prime Minister or don't you? And in that context, the Lib Dems are doing something smart, which is basically setting themselves up as one of the primary forces of opposition to Farage and to Trump. That is the direction that politics is going in. And I think it's actually strategically really smart.
Yeah, I mean, there was a very good piece by Stephen Bush in the FT yesterday which pointed to exactly this, that Davey needs to keep Starmer in place.
It's his path to power.
It is his path to power. I mean, very possibly, we know how unhappy the Lib Dems were with the direction of travel that the party took under Nick Clegg going into a Conservative coalition. You know, whatever your thoughts about whether that did work or didn't work, there were many in the Lib Dems' own party who felt that a deal should have been done with the left. And I guess there is part of Ed Davey that's looking ahead and saying, well, if Labour stays in power, or if Labour becomes the biggest party, then we get to help them. But I think it's actually even simpler than that. I mean, that sort of is looking many years ahead. And it's taking space that, frankly, the government, the party of government, has vacated. Because they're not pushing back on Trump. They're not pushing back on much of the stuff that comes out of America. They're not pushing back in any sort of robust, muscular way on the appalling kind of crackdowns to institutions, to norms, to democracy, to freedom of speech that's coming out from, you know, our special relationship closest ally. And so actually that ground has been ceded to the Lib Dems. Now, I think they went down a slight rabbit hole yesterday. They picked out stuff that Farage has said in the past about, you know, gun licenses and said, oh, you know, are we going to end up with college shootings and school shootings all over Britain? I don't think they needed to go that far, actually, because Farage's own words are so clearly a replica of the kind of conspiratorial nonsense that Trump has been peddling. I just want to play you this clip where, I mean, you tell me if you are not thinking about the Springfield, Ohio cats and dogs by the time we get to the end of it.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
Swans were being eaten in royal parks in this country, that carp were being taken out of ponds and eaten in this country by people who come from cultures that have a different... Would you agree it's happening here? Neither of us can prove or disprove.
Who are taking the carp and the swans?
People who come from countries where that's quite acceptable to do.
Well, I've read headlines that it's Eastern Europeans, Romanians and people like that.
So,
Yeah. Have we got evidence that swans are being eaten by immigrants in royal parks?
They're eating your cats. They're eating your dogs. They're eating your pets. I mean, it is literally, you've swapped out the animal and you've retained the sense, which is that immigrants are coming for your pets.
The royal parks have been forced to deny that this has taken place today.
But I think it was a nice touch.
Have they? What have they actually said?
The royal parks have let me just get the quote. Royal Parks have rejected Nigel Farage's claims that migrants are killing and eating swans from their grounds. A Royal Park spokesperson has said, "We've not had any incidents reported to us of people killing or eating swans in London's 8 royal parks."
Okay, there is a video, which I will leave you to find on your own, which shows a purported RSPCA officer, we don't know if she exists or if it's real or if it's AI, going round to an immigrant's home and taking the lid off a stew and saying you're not allowed to eat swan. You know, I paraphrase. But the implication is that the RSPCA have now got their people on the ground checking out swan eating. Again, the RSPCA has denied this.
So the question is this working for Nigel Farage or not? I mean, given the state
Well,
of
wait,
the polls...
the question first is like, what the is he doing? Sorry, yeah, but, you know, let's not skip over that too quickly.
No, of course, but OK, what the he's
Those
doing...
two things are related. I mean,
yeah, but what the he's doing is borrowing from Trump's tactics. When everyone snorted derisively when Trump talked about what was happening in Springfield, Ohio... Yeah. But he had the conversation then on what were illegal Haitians doing in your cities and the threat that they posed. And that worked actually quite effectively for him. And although a lot of people thought this was going to be an absolute catastrophe for Trump to kind of invoke this whole idea that people were eating the cats and the dogs, which they weren't, it focused the conversation on immigrants. And so much of the tactics and the methods of Nigel Farage are straight out of the Trump playbook. You know, when Trump was asked a difficult question about, say, QAnon, well, I don't really know. I don't really know anything about QAnon. I mean, I think they care about families, and I think that's a good thing. You know, Farage on paracetamol, I don't really know. On paracetamol, I don't know. I don't think science is settled.
Well, I don't know. Invite me back and talk about that next time. Yeah.
And all that side, you allow the idea to just percolate that it might be true, that he might believe, that he doesn't actually take himself out to the far edges of it, but he just nudges the conversation in that direction without any kind of accountability or evidence base to suggest it. And you just throw these things out there and you see, oh yeah, well, I've heard Nigel Farage, he didn't deny it. It must be. I bet there's something to it. I bet there's something to the meeting those swans.
So that's the point. Is you asked before, I rudely interrupted. Does this work for the British public?
This is what I think, and you know, who knows? Maybe this is a misjudgment. I think that Farage is making a profound series of mistakes. I don't think this is in isolation. We saw his conference, which was sort of gushingly reported by some, but actually contained a series of cranks and weirdos and very odd things said, including other sort of conspiracy theories about medicine and so on. We also saw, we talked about it yesterday, this extreme policy on indefinite leave to remain. It is curious because at the start of the year, all of the briefing that was coming out of Reform was saying that this is a brand and party which is seeking to expand its appeal and which is seeking to soften some of its rougher edges. They knew and know that if they're serious about maintaining or going much above 30% in the polls, they've already got much of, if not all, of the more extreme elements of public opinion on the right. What they need to do is try and assuage people of more middling opinion who are interested in some of the things that Farage is saying, but are suspicious of and concerned about Farage and some of those in his party and their past. And what have they chosen to do? At the start of the year, they actually chose, particularly with the fight that we saw with Rupert Lowe and others, to actually have that fight and say that we are the more moderate force. What we've seen, and I think this is dangerous, if Farage's opponents are wily enough and have some balls and have some guts to actually go for him on this stuff, then actually, associating him with Trump indelibly is a big problem, because we know Trump is deeply unpopular in this country, even among right-leaning conservative voters, and also being seen to represent some of the more extreme opinions and elements of the online right is exactly the opposite way of expanding your appeal. So I think this is a dangerous moment for Farage, but it appears to be one. I think because he's concerned, actually. I think what we're seeing on X and the sort of radicalisation of opinion on X is driving opinion within his party, and Farage is attuned to that and alive to it, as well as I think at some point probably wanting to maintain his position with the Trump court, MAGA court, and the Trump dollar to come, and so he's leaning into this stuff.
I think that what we saw at the beginning of the year was something much more sure-footed from Reform, and it seems ironic, actually, that as the Labour government has found itself in deeper water, you know, resignations and all the rest of it, and an uncertainty, that Reform has also diminished in its standing. Now, you know, of course, I'm sure Reform will put me to the polls and say, what are you talking about? You know, we're still way ahead of Labour and we are the putative next party of government and all the rest of it. I mean, they have actually slipped, I think, 3 points in recent polls. We've seen gains from both the Tories and the Conservatives, kind of curiously. But I wonder whether it is partly, I mean, you're talking about the online right. There are also parties to Farage's right now. The Tommy Robinsons, the Ben Habibs, the Advanced Britain, the Britain First,
he should lean into that. I'm not crazy like those guys. He's sounding like those guys.
Why wouldn't you do that? That's what I don't understand. Because there was a time when Farage was appealing to people who just didn't like the level of taxation in Britain, or didn't like, you know, how much their money was going into what they felt was the wrong things, or didn't like the state of, you know, broken Britain, whatever that meant. Once you're going down the dead ends of swans of vaccines, of letting people at your own conference talking about whether the king's cancer was caused by a vaccine. You have basically relinquished that centre ground,
Yeah,
right?
I think
Completely. Any centre right or, any of that centre ground, and people can just put you in the crank box too.
Yes, I mean, it's not about what is centre right or far right. It's about what is a bit nuts.
Yeah.
And the paracetamol thing and the swans and all of that stuff. And I think the important point here is to remember that, to circle back to the question we sort of raised at the start of this, is Trump's America the new dividing line in British politics? We're not America.
Exactly the point.
We have not got the same public opinion divisions as they have in America. The country is not as polarised as America. I still think there is a broadly sane base of people in British... The quiet majority of British people are not on this page and won't be on this page. And that's why I think this is dangerous for Farage. I said, is it working? Well, look, he'd say, look at the polls now, look at where we were a year ago. We're doing brilliantly. But is it sustainable when you're talking about crackpot and crap like this?
That's exactly the point, John, which is that their problem is it's exactly because Trump and MAGA politics, we saw this in the reaction to Charlie Kirk's assassination. It's politics, and the politics of MAGA have become so central to our politics. There's almost now a complete fusion on a daily basis with the US kind of UK news cycle, at least at kind of an elite political level. And the people most exposed to that are Farage and the people around Farage, because they are, and they've long had a lot of contact with each other, the sort of MAGA world, the sort of Farage world. There's long been a fusion there. And so my take of it is that, frankly, they are becoming so sort of terminally online with this stuff. They're so exposed to the kind of mores of MAGA and the daily developments of MAGA that they're making precisely the point that you identify, John, which is that they are transposing a political environment and a set of public opinions from the United States to the United Kingdom, which does not exist, and there lies peril for them politically.
I mean, it does make our lives much easier, because if you take, for example, the speech that Trump made last night to the UN, where he had a go at escalators, he had a go at the teleprompter, he had a go at windmills, he accused Britain of being a Sharia law state. I mean, it was so laughable, this crackpot buffoon standing there because his words hadn't been scripted for him and the teleprompter had gone down. He just went off on the most ridiculous ramble. And what do people do at the end of that? They suddenly sort of latched onto the one line he'd said about Russia and Ukraine and tried to ask whether he changed his mind on Ukraine, as if somehow that there was going to be this one bit of truth that emerged from an absolute ramble of insanity. And all you have to do is put any of that back to Farage. Sorry, are we a Sharia? Do you believe we're heading towards Sharia law? Do you believe that, the person who stopped the escalator, reportedly from the White House own team, should face the full penalty of the law, which is what the press secretary said? Do you believe that, that windmills are a cause of massive danger to the world? All you have to do is run through anything Trump said in the last 12 hours and put that to Farage for him to be absolutely sort of dumbstruck if he can't say no.
Farage would be better off shutting up for a bit. He's in the perfect position in British politics right now, which is that he's got a very well-established brand. Everybody knows who he is. And he is the perfect anti-system candidate at a moment when every other British political party, in one way or another, is seen to be discredited or had a go at governing and been useless at it. And although it's a party that's based on momentum and vibes, he's too addicted, I think, and has been recently, to these Monday morning press conferences and all these sort of things which get him attention. He would be actually better off right now withdrawing and shutting up for a little while.
But Lewis, this is again where we're not America. In the American model, the attention economy is everything, and you have to be giving content the whole time. Donald Trump never shuts up. He's always got something to say on any subject under the sun. And it maybe doesn't work here in Britain for Farage.
Not the same way. Not if you're ahead anyway.
No. But that's the mistake of transposing American political model onto the UK, assuming it's the same thing when it just isn't.
I think what's interesting as well is that what is definitely shifting, and we've seen it from Ed Davey, you've seen it from Sadiq Khan in the last 24 hours responding to the attacks on him personally again from Trump. Something that is definitely becoming more American is definitely the kind of way politicians are responding, particularly on social media, to attacks. The fight back is certainly gathering some pace. So in that sense, I mean, there's no doubt there is a creeping Americanization in the content that we're seeing, in the news that we see, in our style of politics. The thing that is more, but that's all at a relatively elite level. The thing, as we're saying, that is more glacial, it is changing, and our politics is becoming a bit more sort of paranoid and conspiratorial and polarized, but it is much slower at a public opinion level than it is at an elite level. And that, it seems to me, is the mistake the Reform are making, is to mistake the two for the other.
In a moment, we're going to be hearing from the author, the Booker Prize-winning novelist Ian McEwan. His new book is called What We Can Know. It's about memory, it's about the future, and it's about what we're doing to ourselves right now. Well, we're joined now by Ian McEwan, author of the latest novel, What We Can Know. It's an extraordinary thing, Ian, to set a novel in the future to talk about the present. It made me feel that you were addressing the sort of temporal equivalent of an alien who comes to land on the planet and says, what's going on? This is about us right now, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. I guess, I mean, I don't think there's really science fiction, or it's science fiction without the science. But the question is, if you're going to describe ourselves, where do we, where to stand? I mean, and it's a question that faces all novelists at the beginning. First person, third person, and so on. But I thought that being 100 years hence, not too far away in time, I mean, it's, if we think of 1925, lots of modernity was in place. And if we could draw a straight line from the first quarter of the 21st century and try and sort of extrapolate the rest, my guess is we're going to go through a series of crises and maybe even a catastrophe or two, because we're already on that trajectory. So being 100 years ahead gave me an ability to sustain the same language, more or less, and to have someone, a young scholar at a university, looking back not only with some horror but with some envy too, and to remind ourselves that actually we still hold a lot that is precious in our civilization and in our various societies, particularly in the first world, and that we stand before us is a forking path. If I could borrow that term from Borges, the Garden of the Forking Paths, we could still rescue things. We are still rescuing things, and we are making efforts around the world. We mustn't give up on it entirely. But it's also, we are full, I think, of premonitions of disaster. So we live in interesting times, and having someone looking back when everyone now is long dead seemed like a privileged position rhetorically.
Your narrator has a sort of nostalgia and an envy, as you say, but his students, he's an academic, and his students just think we're ghastly, that we've screwed everything up.
Yeah, well, I grew up in the shadow of the Second World War, and my back was somewhere between 80 and 90 million deaths. But as I turned into a teenager, I didn't want to hear about any of that. We had rock and roll, we had cheap paperback books. The world had, all through the 50s and 60s, had been getting better. So I, with something of a blush, remember my lack of interest in what my parents had gone through, Great Depression, Second World War. And so I wanted to, maybe it was something of an act of atonement to satirize these students who are, at their backs have tens, scores, even billions of deaths behind their great-great-grandparents.
Well, explain that to us. Where do the billions of deaths come from? Because on one level it is about catastrophic climate change, isn't it?
Well, this is not really a novel about climate change. The only way to write about climate change is to not write about climate change. It's just the background, but it is very important because it affects very much my character's point of view. Well, I just draw a line, as I said. The first really big moment of crisis is a nuclear war between India and Pakistan. The world rushes in, diplomats, etc., and it stops. Then there's another one with Saudi Arabia and Israel ganging up on Iran to stop it getting nuclear weapons, and they discover that it already has a couple. So that's dire enough. On the other hand, a lot of dust is put up in the air and the Earth's temperature drops 2 degrees and we have a crack at climate change again. So,
But this is a world, you call it the inundation, where basically the countryside has pretty much ceased to exist and you have to go everywhere. You have to go to the library by boat.
So another few years go by and the beginnings of a war between the United States and Russia, and a very large hydrogen atomic bomb lands in the mid-Atlantic, and the western coast of Africa, Europe, and the eastern seaboard of the United States face a succession of colossal tsunamis. Not all of the world is drowned, but certainly Britain, and it becomes an archipelago and a series of islands. My man is writing from one of the largest. It's almost 40 miles long. It's the South Downs, basically. He's at the University of the South Downs. Supply chains of industrial civilization have collapsed. The world has become much more cellular. America is lost in endless civil wars from those who are wanting to claim to inherit the imperial past. And the dominant power is Nigeria, which indeed, for real, will be one of the most populous countries in the world by mid-21st century. So it's a transformed world, but there's also much that's familiar. There are universities, humanities departments, rivalries, and love affairs, and the rest. So that I wanted to get not the transformed dystopia of much science fiction of complete ruin, but still a vastly changed world from our point of view. But still, there are people interested in history and in literature especially. It still lives on. Literary criticism manages, biography manages. But it has nothing of the sparkle of, say, our bookshops. Trestle tables heaped with just last month's history books and fiction and books on science for the layman and so on. A richness of culture that we might regard as a constant din, but is in fact a fantastic privilege.
So is that what you want to come through? Not that we're heading into sort of, oblivion, but that actually this is great. Like, enjoy the complexities of everything now. It's great.
It's really both at once. But I just wanted to mix in with the pessimism, a sense that we have much to preserve and much to be proud of, and one of his points of envy and admiration for us is that we've made a golden telescope and sent it 1 million miles from Earth. This is an incredible time for the first chapter of AI. We have no idea where it's leading. Great advances in biomedicine and in molecular biology and in many, many fields, and a vibrant world literature. Operas everywhere, street parties, gay pride marches. It's fizzing and popping, right down to cheese rolling competitions.
What is interesting is that you have this kind of this massive sort of noises off story about what the new world is going to look like. But at the centre of the novel is this deeply human and actually very distressing description of a marriage that sees Alzheimer's come between its two people. And for me, that was the description of Vivian and Percy and what happens to their marriage and how she... it seems like that is the nub somehow. That is the most human nub of the whole story, isn't it?
It's where we live, isn't it? The day-to-day. And I think that most people over 65 have someone in their life who's suffering from some form of dementia, and it takes many, many forms. One of its most striking aspects, of course, is the loss of memory, which accelerates. And with it goes identity. And I wanted to run that in parallel with this contemplation and reflection on history itself. Just as it's tragic for an individual, so it's tragic for a society to lose its memory, to abandon a general sense in the population of history, not just for historians. And I was alarmed, years back when history started to shrink in the national curriculum, for example. It's so important. But yes, Percy, the husband of Vivian, goes that normal route with Alzheimer's, forgets more and more. And the question always is it worse to suffer it than to care for the person who's suffering?
I mean, go back to that question of history, because it's not just the national curriculum, is it? It is figures in power who are kind of removing bit by bit the repository of truth, whether it's the sort of firing of people at the Labour Department or firing of people who work in science or firing. I'm looking at the Trump administration. This is the brick by brick removal of what we think of as our historical repository of truth, right?
And locally, I mean, in terms of in temporal terms, we've lost now the generation who were much affected by the Second World War and built some of the major institutions, and the EU was one of them, that grew out of a desire to make a new and safer world. And the dispensation, of course, the so-called world order, is vanishing with it. And the UN is becoming less and less important, for example. And that too, it was followed on from the League of Nations, which was a sort of a failed experiment after the First World War.
And do you think that's because the last fighters or the last victims are dying? I mean, is it as simple as that?
Well, there were politicians who at least grew up in the shadow of that war and with full consciousness of it. And yes, I think that it's had a massive impact on our sense of who we are and what we're doing.
Although Trump grew up in the shadow of the Cold War, and that doesn't seem to have played into any of his thoughts about Russia.
He managed to sort of avoid most of that. He was not called up for Vietnam, for example. He had a spur of bone in his foot, we understand. But I think it has made a huge difference. There's now a generation, of politicians who are not remotely connected, either by growing up in the shadow of it or actually having taken part in it or feeling it somehow at their back. And I mean, of course, there are many, many causes to our present turmoil, but I think that's an important one.
Well, what's the answer to that then? Because it certainly isn't to have another war, to bring it closer to home, right?
No, it certainly is not to have another war. But, all around the world, every country that can afford it is preparing for war. I mean, we are now in multiple arms races, so, that shadow hangs over us.
Do you feel that the CND experiment that you were so keenly part of has failed?
It's very difficult to be making that case now with such an aggressive Russia.
So you wouldn't, yourself?
I would have huge ambivalence. I think it's not now current just how frightening and vile and terminal a hydrogen bomb is falling on a city. Whereas it revived in the early 80s when we were worried that the two superpowers, Russia, the Soviet Union and the United States, would stage a proxy war in Europe with sort of limited short-range nuclear weapons. But I think it's faded out of the memory of things.
I mean, do you think we should be more geared up to
I think
war?
we've got to re-educate ourselves on just how extraordinarily terrifying and powerful these weapons are. And yet, they're being manufactured now at an extraordinary rate, all being, modernised, so to speak.
I can't tell if you're saying that's good or bad.
No, it's a terrible thing. It's a really horrifying thing. And we now have a new element in all this, which is the fact that AI will be posed between the human touch, as it were, to launch such a war, chains of command and control are very, very slow. And when you've only got 20 minutes to make up your mind what you're going to do when you see something on your radar, which actually sometimes has been a flight of geese, and we've come very close in the 60s and 70s.
To be taken to war, you really need to trust your leaders.
Yeah.
I mean, that was sort of the lesson of the Second World War, that Churchill, seemed to take the country with him. And many still talk as if he's, the only one that did and could. Do you think we still have that belief in our leadership now?
No, and I don't think we have that belief. And I think that that's part of a much bigger collapse, which I fear maybe more than all those fears of war and climate change put together. And that is what I call in the novel the metaphysical gloom. In other words, you hear it from all kinds of people, not just cultural critics and intellectuals and writers and so on, journalists. You hear it from lots of ordinary people saying, I don't think my children and grandchildren are going to have as good a life as I did. That is what I call a metaphysical gloom, because what goes with that is a loss in the idea of progress, that you could make societies kinder, fairer, more equitable, more opportunities spread across the way. I grew up in a time of fantastic optimism through the 50s and 60s. And that's dying around us.
Do you think we've stopped progressing? Do you think progress has stopped?
I don't hear it much from politicians or a general unified belief that that's what we are about. And we haven't quite lost it. You still hear it to some extent, but it's fading.
I could point you to AI. I could point you to scientific development. I could point you to medical breakthroughs and
access to clean water and more girls at school. But it's not in the mindset of the general populations of the privileged West. I think there's something is dropping. I don't think it's past rescuing, but at the moment I get a feeling, especially coming from the States, which always had a notion of an American dream, that has shrunk, and there's a great deal of cynicism here and across Europe. And I think a populist right is able to insert itself into that pessimism and shrinking of the idea of making things better for everybody, not just your faction, not just your particular set of voters, not just for MAGA, not you. So what? That's what I would call the metaphysical gloom that we've somehow got to remind ourselves. One of the things I want to do in this novel, of how much precious material there is, as it were, mental, physical material we have at our disposal.
I know you're a writer, not the Pope, Ian, but what is the answer to that failure to progress?
Well, it is to take cognizance of the fact that we might not be seeing it, but all around the world, I think there are 10,000 more points of light, all kinds of experiments in relation to climate change, biodiversity. Off the coast of northwest Scotland, 100 square miles of the sea that cannot be fished. Within 7 or 8 years, it has astounded marine biologists what has flooded back. That's a tiny thing in but vast bits of the Pacific are meant to be, at least, free of fishing. So the natural world, at least, will push back the moment we stop doing bad things to it. And more important maybe than that is the fact that the transition from the fossil fuel world, civilization, its rising curve is much faster than, in fact, you'll see a slow decline in fossil fuel extraction. And it's interesting that Bill McEwan, a real prophet of gloom of climate change, has just written a book, some of it was published in the New Yorker last month, saying that he's full of optimism. And the reason we're not seeing this change is because it's happening elsewhere, mostly China.
Don't you think we've slightly given up on climate change? I mean, sort of net zero has become intensely unfashionable, hasn't it?
It's very hard to march and write books, etc., when you're holding your breath about whether there's going to be an expansion of the Ukraine war. And so, yes, I agree. But it could be happening whether we want it, like it, or opposed to it, or not. That is, that we are making huge efforts. But, of course, clickbait does not generally thrive on good news, especially on the internet.
Does the rise of the populist right scare you, or does your optimism sort of stretch as far as saying it will recalibrate, we'll end up in the right place?
Well, it does make me feel quite gloomy. Largely, one important reason is that populist politicians do not care about climate change. And that's a subset of not caring about science or expertise in a number of things. And yet they happily submit themselves to very technical and difficult operations on their knees, or, they climb aboard planes which are run by experts and built by experts and so on. It's very contradictory. But yeah, I am very worried about that. And I'd say the populist right is part of that metaphysical gloom that has caught us. But I think it can be turned around. And yes, by realising, we still have much that's precious. And it's all there to be thrown away or not.
Ian McEwan, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, last night, there were two places you could go for late night comedy. One was the Jimmy Kimmel Show. He has returned, even more pugnacious, and we discuss that performance at length on our show, The Newsagents USA. But the other place was the UN, where Donald Trump was, kind of having a go at everyone and everything.
There was also a lot more besides, though. Come on, there was real content there that Sharia law has come to Britain.
Yeah. So Sharia law is about to take over Britain, and he told us a long tale of how, as a young real estate developer, he wanted to buy the UN building and refurbish it, but they wouldn't let him. So basically, once again, he's feeling a bit hurt by the UN, not for the reasons that you'd think, but for something that happened 40, 50 years ago. Who knows?
But it's also feeling hurt that Jimmy Kimmel is back on television. And on Newsagents USA, we're discussing freedom of speech and whether this marks something of a turning point, as Jimmy Kimmel seems to have won. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.